I don't do drugs, I am drugs. The words of Salvador Dali. Why, dear listener, and indeed dear viewer, am I quoting the great 20th century surrealist Salvador Dali at the beginning of this week's episode? Well, dear listener, and indeed dear viewer, this week we're going to delve into the works of the great David Lynch and his album Crazy Clown Time, and how it relates to his use of music in film. Now, as always, a disclaimer at the very start of this week's podcast. This is a vibes podcast and a culture podcast. We talk about music in different ways and how it affects us and how it affects the culture around us. And David Lynch was a titan of both the film world, the art world, and indeed the musical world. So we'll be delving into how his music informed his art and informed his films, and indeed will later on inform his output as a musician as well. I'm a huge fan of the works of David Lynch. I love his movies, especially Twin Peaks: Fire Walk With Me, but I am in no means a film guy, Mr. Film Man. So I don't know all the ins and outs of his career in terms of that. So I'll try to talk about film as best I can. So hopefully you can help me out in the comments if I've gotten anything wrong in terms of dates or style or things. But yeah, here we go with this week's episode. David Lynch was a man of many worlds. Filmmaker, painter, writer, and musician. While his films are renowned for their surreal soundscape, Lynch's solo music projects brought his abstract vision into an entirely new medium. In 2011, he released Crazy Clown Time, an album as strange and enigmatic as his films. Today, we are taking a closer look at how this record serves as a portal into Lynch's psyche and his unique relationship with sound. Indeed, in the works of David Lynch, such as Eraserhead, turning the mundane or the normal into terrifying nightmares has always been a part of the music, especially in Eraserhead, which is his first movie, and I believe in an interview he said with Mark Kermode, his most spiritual work, or was it Mark Kermode? I believe it was with him. And yeah, he said his most spiritual movie and then would refuse to go on with why. Yeah, that's an interesting movie as well. I think for a lot of people that might be the entrance for them, or Twin Peaks maybe the way they came in. It is a very difficult watch because of just how abstract it is, and indeed the industrial hum of sound that goes throughout the entire work. The idea even of like electricity being like an element within his films as well, but sound from the very outset with Eraserhead is such a character within his movies and within his work. It's interesting that in an interview with him, I believe he spoke about how he started as a painter and an artist, and that he kind of quipped, how he wished that his paintings could move. And somebody went, well, they can. It's called film, and that's how he came into working with film, and how his kind of surrealist world melded with that of the moving image, and having sound be such a backbone of that, especially in the way that it plays with the, as I say, the almost mundane. You see that as well in Blue Velvet, when it starts off with those kind of the picket fences and the ideal world, and then it goes into the undergrowth and this horrible scratching noise. That is seen in his album Crazy Clown Time, which should be said is his actual second record as a musician. And it's very interesting that because in the way that the music also takes that kind of style. Strange and Unproductive Thing is a song that kind of overwhelms the listener gradually, and it becomes like, again, as you know, going back to that idea of Eraserhead, just this thing that slowly but surely overwhelms. I think one of the key things with David Lynch's work as well that I've always been drawn to myself is that he wasn't a surrealist, or he wasn't abstract for abstraction's sake. You always felt that he had a reason for the abstraction, that it was a part of the work, it was a part of the story. His kind of refusal to explain what his movies meant and saying that the actual meaning is in there is also in Crazy Clown Time in terms of like the meaning is within it. And taking something that is quite normal, quite, everyday sounding, and just inflecting that with something that's off, something that's different, something that's kind of menacing, something that has the dreamlike nature about it and has the kind of the feverish nature about it through distortion and noise on Strange and Unproductive Thing, is something that kind of plays into that. I think one of my kind of, sometimes when you look at the modern world in terms of abstract music or surrealism or minimalism or experimental music, one of the things I've always kind of felt can be lost, and not always. I mean, there's great experimental musicians such as Ben Frost out there. But one of the things is that sometimes it feels like throwing spaghetti at the wall and just seeing what sticks. And everything is so easy to do now. It's so easy to elongate a reverb or reverse audio or kind of play audio through a reverb and back and kind of elongate things, and everything's so ready made that it doesn't take the work and time to do it. So you can just create something that's experimental and abstract and go, It reminds me of that Brian Eno quote we were talking about in a couple of episodes in the past, where the idea of John Cage being this element, being this person out in the Antarctic, an Antarctic explorer. And Brian Eno saying, well, he's very glad that there's people like him out there exploring the very far reaches of music. He was quite happy to be living in the south of France musically and stylistically. Eno was himself an experimentalist in ways with minimalism and ambient music, but his was far more relatable. And I think that with David Lynch, it is relatable. Even with music like this, it feels relatable. We know it to be what it is. We know it to be a song. We know it to have the characteristics of a usual song, but to be overwhelmed by the sonic noise and distortion and unfriendliness of strange and unproductive thing, which itself has a kind of a comparison to. Similarly to that of Blue Velvet, I'm always reminded of the great scene in that movie where Frank Booth's lip sync scene, where in Dreams, the great Roy Orbison song is lip synced to him as he's sitting there. And it's, again, a menacing scene because the characters in it are menacing characters. There's a strange nature of this beautiful song and the beautiful voice of Roy Orbison coming out of a character who himself is part of a menacing group of people, and the character of Frank Booth being there, this kind of visceral force in nature, played by the late great Dennis Hopper in that scene as well. And it's just how it starts to slip out of sync, and it just feels that way. The title track in Crazy Clown Time, I should say I'm frightened of clowns, so I don't know why I'm so drawn into this, has a similar kind of feel, kind of a party gone wrong, of what you would normally assume to be a good thing, stripped away of that goodness. And the underbelly, again, kind of playing into the start of that movie, the underbelly and the kind of the meaning being the visual and the meaning being the music in this term, and those two things meeting. It does actually come into play in Crazy Clown Time in terms of just that kind of unease, that the kind of it spirals into this kind of chaos, and the feeling that the kind of the party element of it is has been lost within Lynch's own kind of perception, perhaps, of the scene, and perception of the music as well. It's so easy to see how these things meld, and that how he's approached Crazy Clown Time, much like he's approached his career in music, that the story is there, the narrative is there, the meaning is there. I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's far greater and it means far more if you delve into it. And that relationship is so out there for it. I mean, even the party scene we're talking about, like Lost Highway, and that scene where the man in black character, the strange man, kind of walks in and he talks to the main character, and all the sound in the room just goes off, and it's just so eerie. And that kind of otherness, that kind of mimemic sense, is throughout Lynch's filmic work, but also we can find it here in Crazy Clown Time. David Lynch is a master of emotional duality. In his hit TV show Twin Peaks, Laura Palmer's theme is haunting, but it's also heartbreakingly beautiful. A theme for a girl trapped by forces beyond her control. On Crazy Clown Time, tracks like Pinky's Dream evoke a similar melancholy. Karen O's ethereal voice set against Lynch's minimalist composition feels like a dream slipping away into darkness. Indeed, that melding of beauty and darkness in the works of David Lynch is seen throughout Crazy Clown Time. And the opening track, as I say, with Karen O and Pinky's Dream, it really evokes that of the Julie Cruz scenes in Twin Peaks in the club, where she had that haunting, ethereal voice, which always, reminded me of This Mortal Coil and bands like that. That's just heavenly voice that she has. There's a bit of that as well on Pinky's Dream. It lulls us as it begins the album into that world. That meeting, as I say, of beauty and darkness and foreboding and worry that just kind of emanates from David Lynch's work is really seen in this track. And I think actually Pinky's Dream is probably his best musical kind of work that he's ever released as well. It reminds me as well of when we talk about things like Laura Palmer's dream, or Laura Palmer's theme rather, in Twin Peaks. It always reminds me of that beautiful interview with Angelo Badalamenti, who was the composer for the beautiful work of Twin Peaks. The talk when he's talking to David Lynch and he's writing and he's composing the work, and it's just the description he gives of how Lynch almost directed him into creating that music, and them sitting at the piano, and it's in the trees and there's something wrong, and it's such a beautiful insight into how Lynch saw music and how he saw it as a narrative tool. And indeed, in the album, it plays a narrative tool as the opening, and is our opening. Karen O is just such great casting, if you want to go further than that, as that type of character as well. And in this Pinky's Dream kind of start of the song. And it does carry that kind of menacing and that foreboding, evoking the kind of minimalism composition, but slipping away into that dark underbelly, as we spoke about before. You can also see that in Mulholland Drive and the Club Silencio scenes as well. And that really too plays a part in Lynch's way of showing us a world of beauty. But again, it's that undercurrent, it's something else, that's something other, something away or to the side of the scene, that abstraction that really, I think, speaks to why people love it so much. Again, in the previous segment, we spoke about how, and I believe, I can't remember who said this, but people called him, David Lynch, the people's surrealist, or America's surrealist. And that really does stand to reason, because it's not, I don't believe any of his works are impenetrable. Inland Empire is a tough watch. Inland Empire, more like, I was going to say Lost Highway. I don't think that's a tough watch, but there is a narrative there. Same with Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. Although, like the third season of Twin Peaks, where it's David Lynch, and this, it should be said, this record especially comes in between those times. It is Lynch kind of rejecting the need to explain himself, rejecting the need to explain his art, or even compromise with his art. Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, which was way before the release of this album, but the third season of it very much goes into that, where it doesn't give you Agent Dale Cooper till about 16 episodes into the actual series. So that kind of feeling of twisting and turning, and there being something of foreboding within seemingly beautiful scenes, is within Crazy Clown Time. Even its name, it's very funny to say it here when we're talking about it in such deep meaning, because it has that, again, that kind of feeling of it. There's an interesting, I've been really watching so many interviews about Lynch, and there's this great interview with Mel Brooks, because Mel Brooks produced Elephant Man, which is a great film on its own right, but probably the most, I won't say commercial, but most Hollywood of David Lynch's works. And he speaks about, like, seeing him for the first time, and it's just this guy from, the Midwest, and he's just this man who, he was expecting a Dali, he was expecting a Man Ray, he was expecting something, a Picasso or something, and it's just this regular guy, but who had in him this ability to bring the darkness and to bring the surreal and the extraction from the real world, and that melding of beauty and darkness seen in his movies sonically and visually, but also seen in his musical work here as well as The Big Dream, the album that would follow this. Lynch's mastery of sound isn't just about what you hear, it's about what you don't hear. Silence in his work is deafening, a pause that heightens every other sensation. On Crazy Clown Time, Lynch mirrors this with sparse arrangements punctuated by bursts of noise, creating tension and release. Lynch's use of noise is often calculated chaos, designed to push us into discomfort. In Mulholland Drive, sound builds until it's almost unbearable, just as Noah's Ark and Crazy Clown Time layers distortion and repetition to make you feel trapped in the chaos. Indeed, that feeling of claustrophobia and being trapped within the music can also be seen in Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. In a particularly horrific scene, the kind of rock and roll sound of the music distorts and repeats in this kind of blues riff, and the drums get so loud and distorted. I remember seeing it in the Lighthouse Cinema during their David Lynch season a couple of years ago, Fire Walk With Me. In this particular scene, which I won't describe too much because it should be seen if you want to go see the movie as well, and it's quite, horrific and quite a tense scene. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about as it relates to the life of Laura Palmer. But indeed, this scene is so much, especially when you go see it in the cinema, and with the sound and everything and the music, that rock and roll song, that kind of rock and roll riff and the big drums of it really just feel so intense and so foreboding. And that feeling of kind of claustrophobia and smallness and repetition, and the use of that to almost set an unease within the minimalism and the noise of the music can be seen, as I say, in Crazy Clown Time, in songs like Noah's Ark and things like that. It really does feel that is kind of forceful, aggressive nature is Lynch's way of kind of portraying that way in the narrative, and portraying it within the narrative, indeed, of Crazy Clown Time itself. All these aspects melding into what is his second work as just this great record, and this great piece of work by an artist uninterested or disinterested in the kind of the ideas of people like me, or kind of like that. He makes art for people to watch and people to consume, people to understand and take away what they want from it. And probably somebody who would not like his work in ways analysed to this degree, but I think it is worth looking at. It is worth mentioning just how all his work, from his photography, which is also incredible, to his artwork, to his films, to his music, are so interlinked thematically. And that there is a, obviously he is a person who has a term of kind of sound and is often used in music, this kind of Lynchian sound, something sounding like it's from a David Lynch movie, very much sounding like David Lynch himself. Just how he transformed the music world as well with his music, and how he added to it with his own work too, is such a strong emotive and strong thematic kind of thread within his work, that he was always something in the background, and obviously visuals as well. And I'm sure the filmic of you can speak on the cinematography and his use of camera work and editing and meaning within that. But the music for me has always been something that I think people remark upon when they speak about David Lynch, and how he uses it to upset, or how he uses it in other ways, to give kind of beauty, as we said before. I'm always reminded of that scene in Twin Peaks where the three characters, whose names I cannot remember, but the boyfriend, girlfriend, and their friend, who I think is Lara Flynn Boyle, are sitting and they're just singing a song. And it's like perfectly like reverbed. There's reverb on it, and it's just kind of this beautiful moment. And you kind of feel it's there to kind of show the innocence of youth, and show the kind of the romance and the innocence of the characters within a world itself that isn't very innocent. And you can see that as well in the work of Crazy Clown Time, and yeah, indeed, David Lynch's musical back catalogue. In both his films and his music, David Lynch's goal was the same: to tap into something deeper. Music in his films wasn't always just a backdrop, it was a vital character guiding us through surreal landscapes. With Crazy Clown Time, Lynch expanded that vision, giving us a purely sonic experience that still feels like one of his films. As we reflect on his legacy, his music reminds us to listen not just with our ears, but with our imagination. And so, that was Crazy Clown Time. A little bit of a delve into that and how it related to the works and the films of David Lynch, and how his music has influenced music itself, and how his music influenced his films and influenced his music yet again, in a big kind of circly kind of type thing. But for you, what are your favourite David Lynch movies? What are your favourite moments of music within those movies? What do you think of Crazy Clown Time? What do you think of The Big Dream and albums such like that, and his musical output? What do you think of bands described as Lynchian? Are there other ones that I can't think of that you can think of? Yeah, what do you think of the great works of the great David Lynch? Okay, oh my god, this thing, oh my god. All right, that is a lot. It is a lot having your shirt buttoned up like that for art's sake. Okay, I'm back, baby. Yes, dear listener. They seek him here, they seek him there. Those musos seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven or is he at the disco? The damned elusive Count of Monte playlist has returned. Yes, dear listener. The styling, profiling, limousine riding, jet flying, playlist making son of a gun has once again returned to the floors of J-Listia to bring you another beautiful bounty in the land of TLMT's Irish mixtape on Spotify and everywhere else. If you want to listen to music, I don't care how you listen to music, just engage with art any way you want to. The Count of Monte playlist is back, baby. And for starters, our very first song of the year of 2025, we're going to kick it off with Jess Cav and her brand new single, January Lullaby. And it's very, very interesting that we're talking about David Lynch in this week's episode, and the music of David Lynch, and things that are Lynchian in their presentation, because indeed, January Lullaby by Jess Cav is quite Lynchian. It does have that kind of feel. We're talking about the kind of Pinky's Dream, Carno, Julie Cruz scenes in Twin Peaks. That is pretty much the best way to describe this kind of lullaby, and what a time of year for it, and indeed what a name for it. So it's interesting to see this, because Jess is someone whose art and music and output I would not certainly put in this kind of area, in this kind of feel of kind of music. So it was very interesting when I pressed play on this track that I was like, oh, this is very, very different from what I've experienced from Jess's work before, and that is really cool. Her work with Bark and stuff like that. So yeah, January Lullaby, Jess Cav going into the David Lynch of it all in this January 2025, and kicking us off with a little bit of a banger. And next up, we have Cruel Sister. And once again, in this episode about the great David Lynch, we have another song that could very well be quite Lynchian in its presentation. XOXO is the name of the track here from Cruel Sister, and an artist whose music and output and art I have really liked up to this point. And indeed, with this track, I love it as well. Again, going into that kind of rock and roll kind of feel of this one is kind of a bit more indie, but it's got that backdrop, that kind of fuzz to it, that noise to it, that gives that aggression to it, that kind of contrasts with Cruel Sister's own vocal, and it kind of gives that air of menace to it as well. And the XOXO is kind of abstract itself to the music. Great artist, great Irish musician that you definitely be checking out for any of our viewers, because we have a lot of viewers in America. So check out Cruel Sister, and do check out all these great Irish artists on TLMT's mixtape from the Count of Monte playlist though. But yeah, another cracking track by Cruel Sister. XOXO, check it out, it's on the playlist. Up next we have Annie Dog with an interestingly named, please forgive me, David Gray. It is not a cover of David Gray's Please Forgive Me from White Ladder. Indeed, it's something very different. And once again, in a week where we're talking about the late great David Lynch, we have another track that could very well be called Lynchian. I did not plan it this way, it just kind of happened in a kind of an abstract, almost David Lynchian kind of way. Interesting. No, this is another interesting kind of hazier track. This one kind of has that, again, that's air of kind of contrast and aggression to it, but within this kind of dream poppy kind of presentation. Annie Dog is a very interesting artist who has been coming up with some interesting music, and this is from an EP of the same name, so check it out as well. But yeah, Please Forgive Me, David Gray, and again, something that takes the kind of the everyday, or the accepted, or the popular, or the cultural, and takes it into something a little bit different, a little bit snarled, a little bit aggressive. Annie Dog with Please Forgive Me, David Gray. Up next we have firm favourite here at the Last Mixtape Podcast, Maria Kelly, with her brand new track, His Parents' House. And indeed, this is, again, kind of watching Maria Kelly's music evolve and grow and change. This has a far more indie feel to it, more of a jangle to it, more of an angular sound than I would normally relate to the work of Maria Kelly. And it's really cool to see, because it's that extra texture, that extra kind of sound to it, that extra kind of flourish or paintbrush in the kind of thing to add new colours and new sounds. The new album is coming up as well. We'll definitely be reviewing it here on the Last Mixtape Podcast. But once again, Maria Kelly delivering music and delivering sounds that are both relatable in sound, but also a growth in her music. I don't want to go too much into it, because I do want to review the album here on Last Week's Podcast, so we'll hold back a little bit, but do in the meantime check out His Parents' House from Maria Kelly. It's up on the playlist, chosen by the Count. Finishing up this week's episode with a great new track from Chalk, and Afraid is the name of the track from them. And it's interesting to watch how they have kind of contorted and added this incredible electronic kind of feel of aggression to their music. And they're really going for it in that type of sound when they've evolved from the beginning to now. It really seems like we're going in that area, going in that space. Again, if I dare say it, on an episode about David Lynch, once again, we have something that could be very much at home on a Lynchian soundtrack or album or movie or whatever. But this band, Chalk, obviously one of the bands very much expected to do great things in 2025. They've been followed for a while now. We've been covering here on the Last Mixtape Podcast as well. But a great, aggressive, snarled, contorted, it takes as we say, it takes the mundane and it adds an air of noise and aggression to it that's really cathartic to listen to indeed. And those are 5 songs from January 2025 that I've picked out. The Count shall return next week, because the Count is back on it. But in the meantime, check out new Irish music wherever you can, by whomever you can. These aren't the only 5 tracks out there. These are just 5 that I've taken and I wanted to talk to you about. But there's always great music out there. And that's not just Irish music. Whatever your local sound is, whatever your local scene is, chime off in the comments as well if you've got a local scene that's absolutely bursting with great music as well. And it's not just here in Ireland, but abroad as well. I want to hear about it. But obviously, that is it from the Count. He's back, baby. And I'll return next week. So it goes, and there it went. But before I go, thank you for listening and indeed watching the Last Mixtape Podcast here on YouTube, Spotify, and indeed on Apple. If you could like, subscribe, and comment and help the podcast grow, I would be eternally grateful. And if you have new music for the Count of Monte playlist, or who's the other guy that was just there, not me, or different people, please send it on to Stephen@thelastmixtape.com, and I will be sure to send it on to him. But for now, that was Last Mixtape Podcast. You're the listener and the viewer. I was Stephen White. Hey, so long.